Hi guys, Nick Jennison for Guitar Interactive, and on the test bench today we're taking a look at the Fullerton 714 Mark II from Aria Pro 2 guitars. Now this is essentially a very wallet-friendly version of these kind of California boutique style guitars that are doing the rounds right now. Loads of people are making them. This is a very fine example, especially when you consider how much, or how little for that matter, it retails for. I'll let you look that up in your own time. But let's start up at the headstock end. We're going to talk through some specs and then we'll hear some more tones. In the intro, you heard me playing through a Victory VX100 Super Kraken, boosted with a Laney monolith with some delay and reverb from a Strymon Timeline and a Strymon Big Sky. More on that in a moment, but first of all, let's turn our attention to the headstock. So starting up at the headstock end, we have the traditional Aria Pro 2 headstock design. Those of you of a certain vintage, such as myself, will remember these guitars from the 80s and 90s. I've got quite fond memories of these. There were some really high-profile endorsees back in the day. George Lynch being a notable one for me. He's a bit of a hero of mine, so there's a very positive association. If we turn things over, we'll take a look at the tuners. We've got six, kind of, I suppose you'd call them generic tuners, Aria Pro 2 branded. We've tried our very best to make these tuners go out of tune, and they're not budging. They're rock solid, which is real nice. Speaking of rock solid, the neck, if we just turn our attention to the back of it, is a roasted maple neck. Now, this is something we're seeing lots and lots of at the moment, with good reason. I will say that perhaps the roast on this one isn't as deep as some more expensive guitars of this type, but either way, it feels nice and solid, and there is a real nice satin smoothness under the thumb. One thing you will notice, if we turn it over, is that the neck and the fingerboard are two separate pieces of wood, and that's not really a big deal. It doesn't make a huge difference in my book. I suppose the difference is maybe cosmetic more than anything else. Going back over to the front for a second, we have a fairly generic Corian nut, and we have two, again, pretty much off-the-shelf string trees. That is to be expected, but you will notice that this nut has been neatly lubricated with a little bit of graphite under the strings, just to help things kind of slip and slide, and there's no snags. There's nothing that's going to affect your tuning stability with the trem that we'll talk about in a moment. Now the frets, just for a second, the frets, I was very, very impressed with the dressing on the edge of these frets, although for my money they are perhaps a little bit low for a guitar of this type with such a flat fingerboard radius. However, if you're not into hulking jumbo frets like I am, I'm sure you'll find them just fine, and they're very, very tidily polished and nicely leveled, which facilitates a really low action straight out the box. Once again, I'll just turn this over in the hope that you can see it, but the action is absolutely decked straight out of the box on all of the strings. I would probably hazard a guess that it's under 1 mil. It certainly feels very, very comfortable, which is refreshing because a lot of guitar manufacturers at the moment are setting their guitars up with a higher action, which may be your bag. For me personally, I tend to prefer a lower playing feel, but that's neither here nor there. Now, one other thing that I'd like to draw your attention to is right the way down here, we have this truss rod adjustment wheel at the body end of the neck. And those of you who've seen some of my videos in the past will know I'm a huge fan of this little feature because it means you don't need to take your guitar to bits to adjust the truss rod. If something has gone wrong, it shouldn't really, because the neck is roasted, so there shouldn't be too much moisture in there. But if something's gone wrong with your neck, maybe you've gone to another climate, or perhaps, you know, the 6-month cycle of truss rod adjustment has come up, it's as simple as sticking the end of an Allen key or even a nail in there, give it a little twist, and the job is done. Now, talking about the body, if we turn things over, we're turning this guitar over quite a lot today, but it's nice and light, so it's no chore. You'll see it's a poplar body, which attaches to the neck with this 4-bolt offset design. Lovely carved out neck heel, which is going to make upper fret access nice and convenient. If we turn it back over, we've got a maple cap, which is going to have tonal implications on the guitar. It's going to brighten things up and make it more snappy and more responsive in the high end. But it is finished off with this really nice flame maple veneer in a lovely shade of blue, which I think is gorgeous. Now, this practice of veneering maple caps kind of gives you the best of both worlds at certain price points. It doesn't cost as much as applying a full thick flame maple cap, but you still get all the tonal benefits of having a big slab of maple on the front of your guitar. Now the pick guard design is fairly unique. I really like the way it intersects this bridge humbucker down there. Haven't seen too many guards like that, and certainly haven't seen one in this exact shape. I think it's very, very attractive. It houses two pretty generic single coils, a fairly generic humbucker, one which you can split with the push-pull on the tone control, and a pretty standard straight up 5-way switch, which will give you the usual options that you would expect to see on a guitar of this type. So there are no unusual switching possibilities here. Sometimes you find on these boutique fusion style guitars, if you want to call them that, boutique style guitars certainly, sometimes you find the middle position is subbed out for perhaps these two pickups, but not so here. It's pretty standard. Now one thing I'm not entirely keen on is the jack socket on the front personally. I would prefer to have it recessed on the side. I don't think it looks unattractive, but it seems a shame to break up this lovely bit of flame maple on the top. And of course, the trem is a Wilkinson tremolo, which is very, very highly thought of with good reason. They're fabulous tremolos. They stay in tune really well, nice and responsive, and they don't require Allen keys to change your strings, which is a big plus in my book. So anyway, that is the spec of the guitar. Let's check out some tones. I'm going to take you on a tour of all the pickup selections. First of all, clean, then with a little more gain, and then we'll explore some genre-specific applications. So what's interesting here is these pickups seem to reveal more of their character when we start to pile on the gain, which is kind of interesting when you consider the possible applications of this guitar based on its aesthetic and based on the flat fretboard. I would assume this is intended for the modern rock and fusion type guitar player. Perhaps, I don't know, you may find mileage in a whole variety of other styles, and we'll explore them in a moment. For my money, personally, I didn't feel the pickups performed all that well clean, but again, once we start to stack a bit of filth on, they really start to show a bit of character, particularly the two position 2 voices with the push-pull engaged and the push-pull disengaged. And in fact, it's those split humbucker sounds that are really the stars of the show for my money, although the neck pickup does deliver a convincing bluesy voice with a bit of distortion on. Anyway, one thing I'd like to do before we start checking this out in some specific applications is to explore the tremolo. We'll see how far we can go in either direction, we'll see how subtle we can be, how aggressive we can be, and whether or not it returns to tune under all of those various applications. Let's explore that now. So if you'll excuse the slightly distasteful whammy bar abuse in the middle of that example, we can hopefully draw from that the bar stays really nicely in tune and is capable of quite a broad range of travel, both in the upwards and downwards direction. And this is all accomplished without the use of locking tuners or any particular special exotic nut, which sort of speaks to how good the Wilkinson Trem is on its own. However, if you were concerned, it's not a huge task to upgrade the tuners on a guitar like this to a locking variety. Shouldn't really break the bank, so to speak. Anyway, let's explore some more genre-specific applications for this guitar, starting with the funk fusion type player. We're going to see if we can conjure some convincing funk sounds and also some of those characteristic fusion leads. While the two in-between positions behave very well for this kind of playing, I would probably argue that the best funk sound is going to be on position number 4, and that position number 2, even with the humbucker split, doesn't necessarily have the same kind of character that we'd expect to find from a 3 single coil guitar. However, this position is really rather good for those kind of in-between, out-of-phase fusion lead sounds, and when you pop the humbucker back in full humbucking mode, it delivers the juice for those legato lines and makes things a little more compressed and a little bit easier to play. Anyway, let's explore the same sort of idea, but this time we're going to look for a more expressive modern blues kind of sound. So while the neck pickup through a clean sound can be a little uninspiring at times, when you start to stack on even just a little bit of gain, it responds beautifully and retains a lot of that great single coil character without taking your head off. Anyway, one last question that we seem to get asked all the time is how well does it do in a metal context? We get this about all sorts of guitars, and this is going to be no exception. So we're going to explore the bridge humbucker for heavy riffing and screaming lead tones. So as you can hear, the bridge humbucker is defined and powerful enough to deal with both heavy riffing and screaming, soaring lead lines with lots of shreddy things thrown in for good measure, although personally I would prefer a taller fret for this kind of behavior. The frets really are quite low for a fingerboard of this flat radius. However, that might be right up your street, so I can only urge you to go out and try one. Either way, I've been very, very impressed with the way this guitar has handled everything we've thrown at it. It offers a really high spec and aesthetically pleasing take on this boutique style guitar, but at a price point that is frankly astonishing. I'm going to let you look this up on your own, but suffice to say, some of our production team have already been Googling where they can get one. So there you go. That's a ringing endorsement, I feel. So anyway, this is the Aria Pro 2 Fullerton 714 Mark II. It's lots of numbers, a bit of a mouthful, not the catchiest title, but it is a beautiful looking and really rather nice sounding guitar, especially when you stack a bit of gain on. So I'll leave it there for the time being. My name is Nick Jennison for Guitar Interactive Magazine. I'll see you next time.